Section 2 of The Flood. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 4. I know not how long we remained in a stupor after that tragedy. When I came to, the water had risen. It was now on a level with the tiles. The roof was a narrow island emerging from the immense sheet. To the right and the left the houses must have crumbled. "We're moving," murmured Rose, who clung to the tiles. And we all experienced the effect of rolling, as if the roof had become detached and turned into a raft. The swift current seemed to be drifting us away. Then, when we looked at the church clock, immovable opposite us, the dizziness ceased. We found ourselves in the same place in the midst of the waves. Then the water began an attack. Until then the stream had followed the street, but the debris that encumbered it deflected the course, and when a drifting object, a beam, came within reach of the current, it seized it and directed it against the house like a battering ram. Soon 10, a dozen beams were attacking us on all sides. The water roared. Our feet were spattered with foam. We heard the dull moaning of the house full of water. There were moments when the attacks became frenzied, when the beams battered fiercely, and then we thought the end was near, that the walls would open and deliver us to the river. Gaspard had risked himself upon the edge of the roof. He had seized a rafter and drawn it to him. "We must defend ourselves," he cried. Jacques, on his side, had stopped a long pole in its passage. Pierre helped him. I cursed my age that left me without strength, as feeble as a child. But the defence was organized, a drill between 3 men and a river. Gaspard, holding his beam in readiness, awaited the driftwood that the current sent against us, and he stopped it a short distance from the walls. At times the shock was so rude that he fell. Beside him Jacques and Pierre manipulated the long pole. During nearly an hour that unending fight continued, and the water retained its tranquil obstinacy, invincible. Then Jacques and Pierre succumbed, prostrated, while Gaspard, in a last violent thrust, had his beam wrested from him by the current. The combat was useless. Marie and Veronique had thrown themselves into each other's arms. They repeated incessantly one phrase, a phrase of terror that I still hear ringing in my ears. "I don't want to die! I don't want to die!" Rose put her arms about them. She tried to console them, to reassure them. And she herself, trembling, raised her voice, and cried out in spite of herself, "I don't want to die!" Aunt Agathe alone said nothing. She no longer prayed, no longer made the sign of the cross. Bewildered, her eyes roamed about, and she tried to smile when her glance met mine. The water was beating against the tiles now. There was no hope of help. We still heard the voices in the direction of the church. 2 lanterns had passed in the distance, and the silence spread over the immense yellow sheet. The people of Saintin, who owned boats, must have been surprised before us. Gaspard continued to wander over the roof. Suddenly he called us. "Look," he said. "Help me, hold me tight." He had a pole, and he was watching an enormous black object that was gently drifting toward the house. It was the roof of a shed made of strong boards, and that was floating like a raft. When it was within reach he stopped it with the pole, and as he felt himself being carried off, he called to us. We held him around the waist. Then, as the mass entered the current, it returned against our roof so violently that we were afraid of seeing it smashed into splinters. Gaspard jumped upon it boldly. He went over it carefully to assure himself of its solidity. He laughed, saying joyously, "Grandfather, we are saved! Don't cry any more, you women! A real boat! Look, my feet are dry, and it will easily carry all of us." Still, he thought it well to make it more solid. He caught some floating beams and bound them to it with a rope that Pierre had brought up for an emergency. Gaspard even fell into the water, but at our screams he laughed. He knew the water well. He could swim 3 miles in the Garonne at a stretch. Getting up again, he shook himself, crying, "Come, get on it! Don't lose any time!" The women were on their knees. Gaspard had to carry Veronique and Marie to the middle of the raft, where he made them sit down. Rose and Aunt Agathe slid down the tiles and placed themselves beside the young girls. At this moment I looked toward the church. Emile was still in the same place. She was leaning now against a chimney, holding her children up at arm's length, for the water was to her waist. "Don't grieve, grandfather," said Gaspard. "We will take her off on the way." Pierre and Jacques were already on the raft, so I jumped on. Gaspard was the last one aboard. He gave us poles that he had prepared, and that were to serve us as oars. He had a very long one that he used with great skill. We let him do all the commanding. At an order from him, we braced our poles against the tiles to put out into the stream. But it seemed as if the raft was attached to the roof. In spite of all our efforts, we could not budge it. At each new effort, the current swung us violently against the house, and it was a dangerous maneuver, for the shock threatened to break up the planks composing the raft. So once again we were made to feel our helplessness. We had thought ourselves saved, and we were still at the mercy of the river. I even regretted that the women were not on the roof, for every minute I expected to see them precipitated into the boiling torrent. But when I suggested regaining our refuge, they all cried, "No, no, let us try again. Better die here." Gaspard no longer laughed. We renewed our efforts, bending to our poles with redoubled energy. Pierre then had the idea to climb up on the roof and draw us by means of a rope towards the left. He was thus able to draw us out of the current. Then, when he again jumped upon the raft, a few thrusts of our poles sent us out into the open. But Gaspard recalled the promise he had made me to stop for our poor Emile, whose plaintive moans had never ceased. For that purpose it was necessary to cross the street, where the terrible current existed. He consulted me by a glance. I was completely upset. Never had such a combat raged within me. We would have to expose 8 lives, and yet I had not the strength to resist the mournful appeal. "Yes, yes," I said to Gaspard, "we cannot possibly go away without her." He lowered his head without a word, and began using his pole against all the walls left standing. We passed the neighboring house, but as soon as we emerged into the street, a cry escaped us. The current which had again seized us carried us back against our house. We were whirled round like a leaf, so rapidly that our cry was cut short by the smashing of the raft against the tiles. There was a rending sound, the planks were loosened and wrenched apart, and we were all thrown into the water. I do not know what happened then. I remember that when I sank, I saw Aunt Agathe floating, sustained by her skirts, until she went down backward, head first, without a struggle. A sharp pain brought me to. Pierre was dragging me by the hair along the tiles. I lay still, stupidly watching. Pierre had plunged in again, and in my confused state I was surprised to see Gaspard at the spot where my brother had disappeared. The young man had Veronique in his arms. When he had placed her near me, he again jumped in, bringing up Marie, her face so waxy white that I thought her dead. Then he plunged again, but this time he searched in vain. Pierre had joined him. They talked and gave each other indications that I could not hear. As they drew themselves up on the roof, I cried, "And Aunt Agathe? And Jacques? And Rose?" They shook their heads. Large tears coursed down their cheeks. They explained to me that Jacques had struck his head against a beam, and that Rose had been carried down with her husband's body, to which she clung. Aunt Agathe had not reappeared. Raising myself, I looked toward the roof, where Emile stood. The water was rising constantly. Emile was now silent. I could see her upstretched arms holding her children out of the water. Then they all sank. The water closed over them beneath the drowsy light of the moon. 5. There were only 5 of us on the roof now. The water left us but a narrow band along the ridge. One of the chimneys had just been carried away. We had to raise Marie and Veronique, who were still unconscious, and support them almost in a standing position to prevent the waves washing over their legs. At last their senses returned, and our anguish increased upon seeing them wet, shivering, and crying miserably that they did not wish to die. The end had come. The destroyed village was marked by a few vestiges of walls. Alone the church reared its steeple intact, from whence came the voices, a murmur of human beings in a refuge. There were no longer any sounds of falling houses, like a cart of stone suddenly discharged. It was as if we were abandoned, shipwrecked, 1,000 miles from land. One moment we thought we heard the dip of oars. Ah, what hopeful music! How we all strained our eyes into space! We held our breath, but we could see nothing. The yellow sheet stretched away, spotted with black shadows. But none of those shadows, tops of trees, remnants of walls, moved. Driftwood, weeds, empty barrels caused us false joy. We waved our handkerchiefs until, realizing our error, we again succumbed to our anxiety. "Ah, I see it!" cried Gaspard suddenly. "Look over there, a large boat!" And he pointed out a distant speck. I could see nothing, neither could Pierre. But Gaspard insisted it was a boat. The sound of oars became distinct. At last we saw it. It was proceeding slowly, and seemed to be circling about us without approaching. I remember that we were like mad. We raised our arms in our fury, we shouted with all our might, and we insulted the boat, called it cowardly. But dark and silent, it glided away slowly. Was it really a boat? I do not know to this day. When it disappeared, it carried our last hope. We were expecting every second to be engulfed with the house. It was undermined, and was probably supported by one solid wall, which, in giving way, would pull everything with it. But what terrified me most was to feel the roof sway under our feet. The house would perhaps hold out overnight, but the tiles were sinking in, beaten and pierced by beams. We had taken refuge on the left side, on some solid rafters. Then these rafters seemed to weaken. Certainly they would sink if all 5 of us remained in so small a space. For some minutes my brother Pierre had been twisting his soldierly mustache, frowning and muttering to himself. The growing danger that surrounded him, and against which his courage availed nothing, was wearing out his endurance. He spat 2 or 3 times into the water, with an expression of contemptuous anger. Then, as we sank lower, he made up his mind. He started down the roof. "Pierre! Pierre!" I cried, fearing to comprehend. He turned and said quietly, "Adieu, Louis. You see it is too long for me, and it will leave more room for you." And, first throwing in his pipe, he plunged, adding, "Good night. I have had enough." He did not come up. He was not a strong swimmer, and he probably abandoned himself, heartbroken at the death of our dear ones and at our ruin. 2 o'clock sounded from the steeple of the church. The night would soon end, that horrible night already so filled with agony and tears. Little by little, beneath our feet, the small dry space grew smaller. The current had changed again. The drift passed to the right of the village, floating slowly, as if the water nearing its highest level was reposing, tired and lazy. Gaspard suddenly took off his shoes and his shirt. I watched him for a moment as he wrung his hands. When I questioned him, he said, "Listen, grandfather, it is killing me to wait. I cannot stay here. Let me do as I wish. I will save her." He was speaking of Veronique. I opposed him. He would never have the strength to carry the young girl to the church. But he was obstinate. "Yes, I can. My arms are strong. I feel myself able. You will see. I love her. I will save her." I was silent. I drew Marie to my breast. Then he thought I was reproaching the selfishness of his love. He stammered, "I will return and get Marie. I swear it. I will find a boat and organize a rescue party. Have confidence in me, grandfather." Rapidly he explained to Veronique that she must not struggle, that she must submit without a movement, and that she must not be afraid. The young girl answered "yes" to everything, with a distracted look. Then, after making the sign of the cross, he slid down the roof, holding Veronique by a rope that he had looped under her arms. She gave a scream, beat the water with arms and legs, and, suffocated, she fainted. "I like this better," Gaspard called to me. "Now I can answer for her." It can be imagined with what agony I followed them with my eyes. On the white surface I could see Gaspard's slightest movement. He held the young girl by means of the rope that he coiled around his neck, and he carried her thus, half thrown over his right shoulder. The crushing weight bore him under at times, but he advanced, swimming with superhuman strength. I was no longer in doubt. He had traversed a third of the distance when he struck against something submerged. The shock was terrible. Both disappeared. Then I saw him reappear alone. The rope must have snapped. He plunged twice. At last he came up with Veronique, whom he again took on his back. But without the rope to hold her, she weighed him down more than ever. Still he advanced. A tremor shook me as I saw them approaching the church. Suddenly I saw some beams bearing down upon them. A second shock separated them, and the waters closed over them. From this moment I was stupefied. I had but the instinct of the animal looking out for its own safety. When the water advanced, I retreated. In that stupor I heard someone laughing, without explaining to myself who it was. The dawn appeared, a great white daybreak. It was very fresh and very calm, as on the bank of a pond, the surface of which awakens before sunrise, but the laughter sounded continually. Turning, I saw Marie standing in her wet clothes. It was she who was laughing. Ah, the poor dear child! How sweet and pretty she was at that early hour! I saw her stoop, take up some water in the hollow of her hand, and wash her face. Then she coiled her beautiful blonde hair. Doubtless she imagined she was in her little room, dressing while the church bell rang merrily. And she continued to laugh her childish laugh, her eyes bright and her face happy. I too began to laugh, infected with her madness. Terror had destroyed her mind, and it was a mercy, so charmed did she appear with the beauty of the morning. I let her hasten, not understanding, shaking my head tenderly. When she considered herself ready to go, she sang one of her canticles in her clear crystalline voice. But interrupting herself, she cried, as if responding to someone who had called her, "I am coming! I am coming!" She took up the canticle again, went down the roof, and entered the water. It covered her softly, without a ripple. I had not ceased smiling. I looked with happiness upon the spot where she had just disappeared. Then I remembered nothing more. I was alone on the roof. The water had risen. A chimney was standing, and I must have clung to it with all my strength, like an animal that dreads death. Then nothing. Nothing. A black pit. Oblivion. 6. Why am I still here? They tell me that people from Saintin came toward 6 o'clock with boats, and that they found me lying on a chimney unconscious. The water was cruel not to have carried me away to be with those who were dear to me. All the others are gone. The babes in swaddling clothes, the girls to be married, the young married couples, the old married couples. And I live like a useless weed, coarse and dried, rooted in the rock. If I had the courage, I would say, like Pierre, "I have had enough, good night," and I would throw myself into the Garonne. I have no child. My house is destroyed. My fields are devastated. Oh, the evenings when we were all at table, and the gaiety surrounded me and kept me young! Oh, the great days of harvest and vintage, when we all worked, and when we returned to the house, proud of our wealth! Oh, the handsome children and the fruitful vines, the beautiful girls and the golden grain, the joy of my old age, the living recompense of my entire life! Since all that is gone, why should I live? There is no consolation. I do not want help. I will give my fields to the village people who still have their children. They will find the courage to clear the land of the flotsam and cultivate it anew. When one has no children, a corner is large enough to die in. I had one desire, one only desire. I wished to recover the bodies of my family, to bury them beneath a slab where I should soon rejoin them. It was said that, at Toulouse, a large number of bodies carried down the stream had been taken from the water. I decided to make the trip. What a terrible disaster! Nearly 2,000 houses in ruins, 700 deaths, all the bridges carried away, a whole district razed, buried in the mud. Atrocious tragedies. 20,000 half-clad wretches starving to death, the city in a pestilential condition, mourning everywhere, the streets filled with funeral processions, financial aid powerless to heal the wounds. But I walked through it all without seeing anything. I had my ruins, I had my dead to crush me. I was told that many of the bodies had been buried in trenches in a corner of the cemetery. Only they had the forethought to photograph the unidentified. And it was among these lamentable photographs that I found Gaspard and Veronique. They had been clasped passionately in each other's arms, exchanging in death their bridal kiss. It had been necessary to break their arms in order to separate them. But first they had been photographed together, and they sleep together beneath the sod. I have nothing but them, the image of those two handsome children, bloated by the water, disfigured, retaining upon their livid faces the heroism of their love. I look at them, and I weep. End of Section 2. End of The Flood by Emile Zola.